Joining us now, political writer for The New York Times and MSNBC political analyst Nick Confessori and editor-in-chief of The Atlantic magazine, Jeffrey Goldberg. This morning, The Atlantic is out with its report on the 50 moments that have defined the Trump presidency so far.
And Jeffrey, we're going to get to the list in a moment. But again, number 50.
All right.
Donald Trump touches the magic orb. How am I not drawn in immediately?
No, come on.
You want to read the entire list.
You are our target. You are our target audience. I know
exactly.
I know the orb fascinates you.
It certainly does. It certainly does. All right, so let's talk about, though, before we do that, something far more fascinating and frightening. First of all, the news from the Washington Post that Donald Trump not only against the advice of all of his advisors and most foreign policy experts, he not only met privately with Vladimir Putin, but he also made sure to seize the notes from the interpreter afterwards. What's the impact of that?
You know, the mind doesn't want to go where it's going on that story. It's kind of too absurd to believe. The impact of the story could be huge. I mean, there could be, as David Ignatius mentioned to you a little earlier, there could be a non-conspiratorial reason that this is happening. Donald Trump does upend all sorts of norms in his behavior and the way he approaches foreign leaders. So maybe there is a quote-unquote innocent explanation for this. It just seems as if, I mean, the easy explanation is he was embarrassed by something he said, or he knew that something he said was compromising in some way and wanted to make sure that the translator, who works for the United States government, didn't share it with any of his officials.
Yeah, but at the same time, though, that coincidence, if it were just a coincidence or if there were an innocent explanation, that followed Donald Trump saying, I trust the ex-KGB agent more than I trust my intel community. Follows one bizarre incident after another, going all the way back to when we interviewed him in 2015, and he said on our show that Vladimir Putin was a strong leader and basically preferred him to Barack Obama, and it was fine that he murdered people. We kill people too.
Look, our Frank Foer in this project we did on the Trump first 2 years, you know, talks about collusion that's in plain sight. I mean, you don't have to be. This is not a mystery in some ways. There's a pattern of behavior. Our jobs in journalism, our job is just to establish the patterns. And there's a fact set here that is very compromising, and pointing it out is the most obvious thing to do in the world. Doesn't make. Go on. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to ask you the same question I asked David Ignatius. What was your reaction? What was your gut reaction when you first saw Michael Schmidt's story that said the FBI was investigating the President of the United States to see if our president was an agent of a foreign power who considers themselves to be enemies with the United States of America?
I mean, there's two reactions. One is the practical reaction, which is, of course. I mean, like I said, there's a set of facts that lead you to think that that's their duty to do. The other reaction is that is incredible. I mean, in the true definition of incredible, it's beyond credibility. How has it come to pass that we're having a serious debate about whether the President of the United States is possibly a Russian intelligence asset? And we're having a serious conversation about it. That's something that, I mean, I always go back to the Obama tan suit controversy. You know, remember what a controversy used to look like in Washington. Now we're talking about Manchurian Candidate style scandals. It's just mind-boggling.
Well, and Richard Haass, let's talk about what's going on across the globe right now. You've had Mike Pompeo have a rough tour across the world, and now he's talking with Saudi Arabia. This is a region that's really up for grabs right now. What has been the impact of Donald Trump, and what has the impact of our scattered foreign policy meant as Mike Pompeo has gone across the region, doing, I would suggest, making some very unfortunate statements?
Yeah, the Secretary of State did himself and this country no favor with the speech he gave, which was wildly inappropriate anywhere, but certainly on foreign soil. But I think the largest story in the Middle East is one of American pullback, most dramatically in Syria. But when the president goes to Iraq, he neglects to meet with the Iraqi government leadership. And all of this adds up to a sense that we're trying to wash our hands of this region. We're leaving it to Iran, despite all of our tough talk, to Russia. We've given up on any political change in Syria. So we're getting a laboratory. We're getting a glimpse, Joe, of what the world looks like when the United States abdicates. And as we're seeing in the Middle East, it's anything but pretty. It's not just that bad people and bad actors come to the fore, but people stop thinking about what this might mean for American interests. We are essentially limiting our influence in a part of the world that still matters, whether it's energy or the potential for terrorists or nuclear proliferation. I'll just say one other thing. A few weeks ago, we were talking about the new year, and I said that the thing that worried me most was the possibility of a war involving Iran. Well, in the last 48 hours, we see the National Security Advisor talking about asking for war plans for potential strikes against Iran. You've got an Israeli government that's attacking Iranian position in Syria in the run-up to the Israeli elections. You've got a Saudi leadership that would love to have the story be the problem that Iran is posing, so people stop talking about Mr. Khashoggi's murder. So this is beginning to line up, I think, as the most dangerous part of the world for 2019.
David Ignatius, you have a president who talks about wanting to bring an end to what he calls endless wars, taking a couple thousand highly effective troops out of Syria, and at the same time his national security advisor is making plans to attack Iran.
The Syria back and forth has just been appalling. It's just like watching a bouncing ball from one day to the next. You almost feel sorry for National Security Advisor John Bolton, who lays out a tough rollback of Trump's initial announcement about withdrawal of troops, and then the contradictions and corrections and second guesses of his statements begin. And at this point, I think it's very difficult for anyone in the region to know precisely what our Syria policy is. I wanted to ask Jeffrey Goldberg, who's done this wonderful exercise looking at the top 50 moments of Trump world in the last 2 years. Jeffrey, I often wonder what lasting damage this period is going to do to American politics and our standing in the world. What's your intuition about that?
Well, nothing lasts forever. I mean, we do wax and wane in our influence and on our popularity. But I do, and look, you're on the exact right question. It's when Trump is no longer president, do we bounce back to our usual selves, or is this some sign of inevitable decline? I think obviously the longer this goes and the weirder it gets, and you know what, it's this bipolar quality or multipolar quality to policymaking right now. No one can trust us anymore because the president makes foreign policy by tweet after seeing something on television. The national security apparatus and the foreign policy apparatus, such as they are today, are doing one thing. The president is doing another. If you're an ally of America, you don't trust us. If you're an adversary, the only possible positive thing you could say is adversaries right now might look at us and say, we don't know what the hell they're going to do because this president is completely unpredictable. Their intelligence agencies are trying to analyze our moves and can't understand them because we can't understand them. So as a long term, long term, we just look unserious because we elected someone who does not approach the world in any kind of serious, coherent fashion with a mind toward what American values are globally.
I would take it a step further and worry that we look weak, and that this is the moment that anybody with ill will has to act or to get further than they have been able to get in the past as it pertains to us on the international stage. Yamiche.
Right.
The president has been described as politically Teflon. When you look at these moments, are there any of these moments that threaten his presidency more than another?
That's an interesting That's an interesting question. I would say anything having to do with the collusion investigations, I do think threaten his presidency. I mean, I think like most people in Washington, we just assume until proven otherwise that this presidency lasts 4 years. But on the Russia front, and we have a piece by Annie Lowry ranked very high on our list about, because we forget all these things, his business dealings. The man is still in business. The man still hasn't released his tax returns. Let's say somebody does find his tax returns. We might find some really interesting things in there. There are things that do, I think, threaten the presidency. There are things like the magic orb, which just go to the cosmic weirdness of this whole presidency. But I think he's in jeopardy on multiple fronts.
So, Jeff, I hope you'll come back in 2 years and give us the next list for the second 2 years, and hopefully it will be a bit different. But I do want to ask you, so what's number one? Obviously, there are some things on this list that make you giggle a little bit. There are some things that make you frown. There are some things that are tremendously sad and significant. So what's number one?
Number one has to do with the family and child separation policy. And we put it there because it seemed to go against nature a bit, and certainly goes against traditional Republican thinking about the sanctity of families, which is also Democratic thinking. It's American thinking. It just seems so. It was the gratuitousness of it, the cruelty of it, that struck us as having lasting moral consequence.
Mm-hmm. Richard Haass, wrap up the first hour for us.
We're in a place
Good luck.
Domestically that, quite honestly, none of us ever thought we would get to. The conversations we've had around this table and other people are having when they read the New York Times and Washington Post, we've now gone to a place, quite honestly, not only have we never seen, Joe, but none of us ever thought we would see. And here we are, we're only halfway through this presidential turn, yet the foreign policy conversation shows the world goes on while this is going on. That you can't press the pause button. So the United States is distracted, it's divided, we're inconsistent on steroids, things are happening, things are deteriorating, and yet we still have in front of us constitutional and political issues of the like that we've never contended with before. If you're not worried, you're not paying attention.
And Yamiche, you've obviously for the past 3 years been reporting, going across the country, and reporting on people supporting Donald Trump. I'm curious, as you see these numbers starting to bleed, Donald Trump starting to bleed support among working class white voters without college degrees. Are you surprised by that, or do you think that this is just the natural consequence of a government shutdown and some trade policies that are really having a tough impact on farmers and working class Americans?
I'm not surprised by that, but it is in some ways striking to people because this is a president who's really kept his base through scandal after scandal. The Atlantic is talking about 50 moments. We could probably maybe do 360 moments, right? There's so many things that are going on with porn stars, with Russia, with all sorts of things going on. But when you hit people in their pockets, and that's what the shutdown is doing, it's hitting people in their pockets, people start to reevaluate whether or not they can support a presidency. That means that you might not be able to pay your mortgage or might not be able to get your insulin. So I think when you start threatening people's lives, that's when President Trump really gets into a place where people are wondering whether or not they can continue to support him.
Yamiche Alcindor, thank you very much. Richard Haass, thank you. Jeffrey, stay with us. Still ahead, we have much more on the two bombshell reports that are raising new questions about Donald Trump's ties to Russia. Tom Nichols say all the signs point the same way, that Vladimir Putin has compromising information on our president. Tom will be our guest. Plus, the Washington Post's Philip Rucker joins us with his new reporting about the president's inability to be a reliable negotiator in the shutdown showdown. It is reporting that the president didn't like too much in his Saturday tweet storm. Morning Joe is coming right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.